Welcome, everyone, to another episode of I Am Billerica. My name's Jim O'Donnell. To my left, but really he's way out on the right, is Tony Lacacia. Is it junior?
Still.
Is it junior? Are you a junior?
If you're not doing the Corey, yeah.
Okay, well, we'll do the Corey next show. And to my right is the old guy, Peter Greeley.
Old is a relative term.
Yeah, exactly. Peter, as we know, is a fine, upstanding resident some days. And tonight's show...
And you are?
Oh, and I am just the guy in the middle. Tonight's show, we're really pleased and happy to have our new superintendent of the schools. Obviously, let him introduce himself and go into his background in a minute. But just for a second, just want to say we're taping this the day after an incident that we all, unfortunately, terrible thing that happened down in Connecticut. And all of us sitting in this room are parents, so I'm sure we all sit back and reflect on that. And I just want to take a moment, and I think all of us like to take a moment to reflect and just think about it. Tragedies like this have happened, and maybe, in the morning or when you go home, and I'm sure all of us go home, is you have a chance to hug your kids, because we never know what's going to be around the next door when we open it up and what happens that morning. It's a shame. I'm sure all our thoughts and prayers, as well, and everybody in this room and with the crew, pass on our thoughts and into their families over the next several months and years. It's going to take time over that. But hopefully to move it up a little bit further. Tim, thank you very much. Welcome to the show. The next hour is all yours. It could be our infomercial and everything. By all means, as somebody that truly works for you, I've seen a lot of changes already, a lot of positive changes going on over there.
He's already kissing up.
He made sure he slid that in there.
Here we go. It's interesting, yeah. Well, hey, listen, I didn't even get him the water, but that's afterwards. But anyways, welcome.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
Pete?
Well, no, we're going to go into your biography and your background.
Yeah.
My daughter, when I told her you were appointed superintendent, of course, she was a student of yours years ago, and she was kind of disappointed, Tim, because she said, that means he's out of the classroom. He's the best teacher I ever had.
Well, that's very nice to hear, and
kissing up.
What do I need to kiss up?
I haven't heard from Tony kissing up yet, so I'm looking forward to that later on.
I don't have anybody that works in the school department. I'm like these two guys.
But I will say that this is a community that I came to in 1997. Fresh out of college, started teaching at the high school, and I'd started to fall in love with teaching while I was in college and moved into that career. But when I came here, it wasn't just about the job; it was about the community as well that I fell in love with. And so I started in '97. I actually met my wife here in Billerica as well too. We had a high school romance, except we were both teachers instead of students. And then
better than one being of each.
Yeah.
Whoa, we don't go there.
And then in 2005, I had the opportunity to become the curriculum coordinator for math and science for the district. And it was a really tough decision for me to leave the classroom, because I love working with kids. I love seeing those aha moments when kids really got it. Students like your daughter Laura, or the thousands of students I had over this over the time that I worked there. But that being said, the opportunity to have a broader reach and to make a difference in more lives of kids than just the 100 or 125 I had in my classroom on a yearly basis really was an opportunity that I couldn't pass up. And so I did that for a number of years, and then I guess in 2010 I had the opportunity to move into another role as the Director of Information Systems and Accountability for the district. So I did that while still doing some of the math and science job, but that moved me sort of out of more of a school-based role into a central office role. And that gave me an even broader scope of what was going on across the district. At the end of the school year in 2011, we had a major change in the landscape in central office, where Dr. Sierra retired as superintendent and Dr. Sapphire left to go to Gloucester, and Paul Zamansky, who's our business manager, left to go to Andover. We had a major shakeup, and we reorganized our central office. And at the end of that, I became the assistant superintendent for finance and operations, while we had Bill Ryan in here as the interim for the year. And I had spent most of my career working on the curriculum side of things and working on the teaching and learning side of things, and then transitioning into the business role and the business and operations role gave me that broad, an even broader range of knowing how those two pieces really fit well together. So, when the opportunity came for me to be superintendent this year, it's not just the job itself, but it's the job in this community. That although I'm not from here originally, I grew up in Western New York, grew up in
We're gonna
Buffalo.
talk about that in a minute.
We'll get there in a minute. But it's
really grow up in Buffalo?
but this is a community that I've fallen in love with, and I hope to be here for a long, long time. So
Very good.
So it really helped to have the knowledge of moving all the way through when you decided to apply for that.
yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, there are I'm part of an induction program right now with a whole bunch of new superintendents across the state, and some of us have come up from within the ranks in the school system, and others haven't. And one of the advantages of being in the system beforehand means that you have a better sense of knowing who all the players are and where some of your points are. Obviously, some of the disadvantages are that people also know where your trigger points are and things like that. But I've been spending a lot of time, and maybe I'm transitioning into some of our other topics, but I've been spending a lot of time in the last month or so really getting into schools and spending a lot of time talking with teachers. And the fact that I have a lot of these pre-established relationships means that people are being really open and honest with their feedback to me, and that's incredibly appreciated. Because that allows me to really get a sense of how what we're trying to do is actually being implemented in the classroom, which is where it all really matters.
So what has been the focus over these first 3 to 5 months that you've been on the job?
So we got a whole bunch of different things going on. I mean, this has been a crazy year for everybody in the school department. And it's not just Billerica, it's the entire state. It's actually the entire country, but particularly in this state, we've had a lot of external pressures. So the Massachusetts just adopted the Common Core set of standards, which are new standards for what we should be teaching in math and in English, and that hits elementary teachers more than anybody else because they're teaching all of it. So that's a difficult transition of itself. The state's also just implemented a new evaluation system, which it's our first year of doing that system this year. So that the old model where for somebody who'd been around for a little while, we're only allowed to observe them once every 2 years formally. Now we're getting the classrooms much more, giving teachers much more feedback on a regular basis, having those conversations, which is all exactly what we should be doing. But it takes a lot more time.
Sure.
And it takes a lot to work through some of the logistics and details with that. We're trying to increase, our communicative presence through websites and through other things like that. So that's another pressure that's on us. And so all these different pieces, it's been a tough start because there's been a lot of change. But at the same time, our focus going forward is that we want to have, continuity in the people helping make these decisions, and really allow us to focus on depth of implementation over the coming years.
Now, just to get back to your background, right? And you touched on it, if you don't mind. You're obviously a Buffalo fan.
I am. It's been a long, cold, dry spell. Yeah.
Despite no snow out there, it has
exactly,
been cold. Yeah. But your education-wise and how you ended up.
Yeah, so
you transitioned out here east, right?
Yeah, I grew up in Buffalo, and I left there in 1993 to come east to come to college. I was an undergrad at MIT. I went to MIT with the intention of I was going to be a computer scientist.
Okay.
And then discovered partway through that process that, sitting behind a screen, programming all day long was not what was going to work for me. I needed to get out and engage with people, and how I got started on the teaching track was really I was looking for a part-time job. It was my sophomore year in college, and I had the opportunity to teach SAT prep classes on Saturdays to students, mostly from Ringe and Latin in Cambridge. And so I did that, and again, those sort of aha moments, that opportunity to teach high school kids, really, gave me something here that mattered. So after that, MIT was just starting a teacher prep program at the time, so I took some classes there, took some classes at Wellesley because there's an arrangement there, student taught in Cambridge, and then I came here.
The Republic of Cambridge.
Yeah.
Then here, right? It started.
And then here, right out of college in '97. Yeah. Young kid starting off here.
Okay.
And he's still here?
And I'm still here.
That's impressive right there.
You mentioned the math program.
Yeah.
And I know there was some concerns, particularly at town meeting and even prior to town meeting, about math getting away from everyday math as it's taught in the schools now, getting away from everyday balance your checkbook type math.
Yeah.
Is that happening?
Well, if we're thinking about, I guess the key with math is there's a certain base set of computational skills that every kid needs to know. I mean, whether or not it's for your personal finance, or whether it's, basic stuff you're doing, going to the grocery store, making your, all those kinds of things. That's never gone anywhere. That's still there. But what these new standards are designed to do in mathematics is to move away from 1,000 different topics that are done very superficially and shallowly to a broader set of deeper understanding for kids. And really one of the keys in this is that along with the standards is something called the Standards for Mathematical Practice. And that's really designed to get kids talking about math more at an early age to develop those deeper understandings. And there's a great example of things with mental math. If I ask everybody here to do 12 times 4 in their head, you might have 3 different ways of doing it because of how you were taught.
And 3 different answers.
Yeah, without
I wasn't going to go there, but it's
all right.
Tonight, my answer might change by tonight.
Yeah.
But that's the thing there's for a long time math has been about everybody's supposed to be pigeonholed to using the same kind of algorithm to get the same answer. But the reality is that because we know much more about the way that kids learn, so that if I want to do 12 times 4, I might say, okay, I know my multiplication table is to 12, and 12 times 4 is 48. Or I might say I know that 10 times 4 is 40, and 2 times 4 is 8, and I can add those pieces together. Or I know that I can take 12 and double it twice, double it to 24, double it again to 48. And all of those are legitimate, reasonable ways of doing that. And so, and by the way, I will say that this can be very confusing for parents because they've been taught how to do it one way all the way through. And we hear, even the last math adoption we did, I heard from parents in kindergarten saying that, I can't help my kids with their math. And it's, because it's tougher for adults to kind of shift their mindset. But the more that we can, we know that the sooner we can get kids thinking more deeply and realizing that it's not just a lockstep thing, the more benefit it's going to have in the future. It's one of the challenges that we face across the country, but particularly in Massachusetts, is we have all these high-tech jobs, particularly in this area. We have all the biotech jobs, we have the defense job, everything sort of along the Route 3 corridor here. But the percentage of kids that we have interested in going into math and science fields coming out of high school is very low. It's lower than national average, significantly. And the percentage of kids that are graduating from college with the skills they need to go into those jobs is not as high as it should be. So there's a lot of efforts going on statewide. And I've been involved in a group called the Northeast STEM Network for a number of years. I'm on their e-board. It's partnerships between business and higher ed and K through 12 schools and workforce investment boards and various groups about how do we get more kids into the STEM pipeline and move them to these careers, and having more rigorous standards that allow kids to know more deeply about how mathematics is and can be used is the first step in getting more kids into the pipeline.
You actually touched on 2 things that were on my list here that I was writing down. One is the real life applications, like you just mentioned. How do you use it? A lot of the kids have the skills to process the equation or whatever it is, but they don't even know why. And it's not until you actually get out there and start using it, right, that you say, well, this is all the things I learned in 10th grade, but now I know why it was so important. So I do think that, because I know that when we have some high school kids that come work for us, and you give them a simple task, they're like, balance this, or I might ask them, can you reconcile these accounts? Well, reconcile a checking account? They can't process that whole thing, right? So, but what you said about the kids getting into some of those other fields, one of the things I was jotting down while you were talking was that we've been doing the Shadow Day at the Rotary, and one of the things we talked about is what the kids used to be interested in. Those fields are gone. None of the kids sign up for those anymore. There's nobody signing up for finance. There's nobody signing up for real estate. There's nobody that signs up for banking. Those now they gravitate towards police and fire. They gravitate towards attorneys, and or healthcare. Those are the things that the kids are gravitating to. So now we've got to change and say, well, how do we get these kids interested in shadowing, getting into the program, where we're offering them what we used to think they wanted, and we couldn't be further from the truth anymore. So we've got to go out and recruit new mentors to say these are the kinds of fields we want. But those kids are not prepared when they do leave and they don't go into those chosen fields. They're going to, maybe it's something in finance or something like that. They're not even thinking about that. How do we get them to do what you had mentioned?
I mean, one of the things is to really hit kids at the middle school level. I mean, there's a great piece of research that I first heard about 5-6 years ago, which is that kids generally add careers to what they want to be when they grow up until about 6th grade, and then starting in 6th grade they start subtracting from that list. So that opportunities that we have for kids in that critical age range, which when we talk about things like math, I mean, that's actually where kids, once some of the algebra stuff comes in, that's where we start to lose kids as well too in math, and they think that, okay, I can't do math, when in reality it's our job to make sure they're there. But whether it's things like, mentoring programs or particularly girls in middle school, things like having lunch with female role models in various fields, because we know that girls are underrepresented in math and science fields in particular. So I think that's a key group to hit that we're not doing a strong enough job with, our kids in that 12 to 14 age range.
How can we do that as a community? How can the community be involved then? Is there something that, maybe through the guidance department, is there something that can be worked on to say, let's try and bring in some local professionals into the schools? I don't mean you have to go into the school, but into the teaching program and say they can come in and talk about their experience and how what they learned here prepared them for where they're at now. That's actually one of the things we're starting to try to work on right now, and I've had some good conversations with Rich Scanlon out of the assessor's office and Stephanie Cronin in economic development, so that because they obviously have more of the ins to some of the businesses in town than certainly we do in the school department, about leveraging those connections that we have to have sort of a meeting of the minds around this issue, getting the school department and the business community together in a really meaningful way to brainstorm, okay, what kinds of things can we do to get into kids? I will say, we have one of the programs we're doing this year, which I absolutely love, and it's not at that middle school range that we talked about, but there's a company called Orbotech. Orbotech has their headquarters over on Manning Road. They do work with what's called automated optical inspection. So they make devices that will look at circuit boards to find defects, things like that. And so what Orbotech is doing is they're going into our high school and they're meeting with both our engineering class at the high school, which is a senior elective, and our marketing class at the high school. And so that business is actually hitting kids on two fronts about, what does the manufacturing process look like and how does the engineering design process play into that? And our kids are actually working with some of the equipment that Orbotech's using. But at the same time, they're talking to the marketing classes about how do you take those products from design to market. And the fact that we've got some kids that are overlapped in both classes that are really getting that full sense of what that operation looks like is such a powerful thing. Yeah. Now, not every relationship can be as deep as that one, certainly. But providing those kinds of opportunities from the large scale like that to that small scale about career lunches or shadow lunches. I mean, it even starts with some things, like we have a power lunch at some of our schools. The Vining was really one of the first one that did this, particularly, its location along Middlesex Turnpike, where people that work at businesses in the area will come in and read to kids during lunchtime, and may talk about what they're doing and what to put those ideas in kids' heads. The key is once they're in there, it's our job educationally to give them the skills to go there if they want to go there. How much of it is a time issue, though? Do you have time to be doing all these things when you're only there for so many days and so many hours, and the kids need to get their core work done, and you're preparing them for whether it's a standardized testing or whatever it happens to be, that you've got to get certain things in before the end of the school year? Well, the key is to in some ways to be smart about the way that we're doing the actual instruction. Instead of having traditional math classes, here's a problem, do 20 more of the same kind of problem, as opposed to here's a real world situation we're dealing with. And how do we use the mathematics to attack this real world situation, come up with a meaningful solution, present that solution to the other kids in the class, critique each other's solutions. I mean, that's what happens in the real world. Sure. That's, so we need to have the kind of instruction that we do with kids in the real world mimic the kinds of skills that they need to do, Agreed. A, when they get to college, and then B, when they get out into the workforce. Agreed.
How do you keep up with practical education? With technology changing daily, you could be teaching something in September that, quite frankly, could be outdated by June. I mean, it happens. We've seen it all happen. How can curriculum keep up with that pace?
I think that, I used to say this as a teacher all the time. Because as a math teacher, when I would do things like 2-column proofs in geometry, and kids had asked me, what do you ever need this for? And the answer is, to be honest, you're not going to ever have to do a 2-column geometry proof again in your life. But
that was my line.
But it teaches you how to think.
Well, but that's exactly the point. It's about giving students the kinds of transferable skills about thinking so that those key points of collaboration, communication, and critical analysis and problem solving are applicable to whatever the situation is that they find themselves in. I used to joke about that geometry, issue of proofs. That, when you're having an argument with your boyfriend or girlfriend and you want to win that argument, it's nice to have some logical reasoning. That works sometimes. But there's some great things out there that say that, I think of maybe of the top 10 professions, 5 of them didn't exist 10 years ago. And so, that number may be a little bit off, but there's a great video, I'm going to be careful about how I say it, called Shift Happens. Which, so if you
Try that in a public.
You can say that.
so,
This is public access.
so you can go on YouTube and look at that video, because it really talks about those kinds of skills that why it's not just about what's currently out in the workforce, but developing the kind of underlying skills that are transferable for kids to be able to apply to whatever situation they find themselves in.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree.
See, my question for you, not to get in, because I know later on we're probably going to get into your whole plans of what you'd like to do with the facilities and everything else, but a couple of the meetings that I happened to attend, some of your public meetings, and you brought up some good points that I thought that have been missing over the years that I see interacting with the kids, is that Shawshing Tech started off with a school, vocational school, for kids that were going to go into the vocational field. Obviously, as you were talking earlier, things have changed, and jobs are changing. And I see and you kind of picked this up during one of your conversations, is that there are some kids that aren't making it to Shawshing Tech, and there are some kids in Billerica, because they can't get into Shawshing Tech, that are really there. And you've talked about potentially, when your facilities are looking at trying to fill that gap in the high school a little bit. I see that, because unfortunately, some kids can't make it because of the standards that they want down there, and it's a shame, because I think they could use that. You thought about bringing back some other type of, someday.
So when we talk about wanting to bring vocational and hands-on opportunities back for kids, and I've said this publicly many times. It's when we talk about a building project, we talk about whatever. Our job should not be to try to duplicate what Shawshing has, because they're going to do it better than we can do it, because that's their design. Our job is to provide complementary opportunities so that students are able to, and we're not necessarily talking about fully approved Chapter 74 programs or things like that, but opportunities for kids to be able to do hands-on work that is going to be more engaging to them. And whether or not that's students that struggle, that need, less of a classroom outlet and more of a hands-on outlet, or whether it's students that are, like the engineering class that we talked about before, that literally don't have a place to make stuff in an engineering class. That's what we're talking about having those hands-on opportunities for kids, and that we need to have buildings that are going to support the kind of instruction that takes place in that regard.
Because it's interesting you say that, because obviously my son went through the lock, and when he got to the 8th grade, ready to come to the high school, his math and science skills were at a point that he was directed or instructed, he had an opportunity that ended up at the Minuteman, because they have an engineering program over there. But then all of a sudden after that, you guys in your direction, I guess, started a similar program like that, which seems to be a need in this area, because a lot of people have gone outside, as you know better as well as I do, gone outside the system to pick up another thing. So what you're talking about, surely it seems to be a want and a need in this town.
Without question.
Yeah.
The two teachers, that engineering class I talked about is actually co-taught by two phenomenal teachers. Christine Griffin, who's a math teacher who used to be a civil engineer in a former life. Matt Flood, who's a physics teacher who actually used to work at Greater Lawrence. So he had some of that VOTech background beforehand. But the two of them have done a phenomenal job with that program. One of their first projects last year is they actually worked with Google and Google Earth, and they did a SketchUp of the gazebo in the town center. And so if you go on Google Earth, that's actually our students that have the Google Earth SketchUp of the gazebo there. But absolutely, it was a need that wasn't there, is that we need to realize, for a long time, public education was the default choice for everyone. And we need to realize now that we're in a competitive educational marketplace, that whether it's VOTech schools, whether it's charter schools, whether it's private schools, that we need to provide the kinds of opportunities for kids that are going to prepare them for their futures, not prepare them for our pasts. And that's the key going forward.
Sure. Maybe that's the opportunity then for a public school and private industry partnership, is you don't have the space to be giving the hands-on training, but maybe there's an opportunity there to give them the classroom work, and
Yeah.
for part of the day, they actually work
Yeah.
in a private industry. Maybe there's an opportunity to somehow make that kind of a partnership work.
Pete?
Yeah, let's change direction here a little bit. A discussion that's been going on here for years and in other communities for years, and other communities have adopted it. Full day kindergarten. Let's get into that. Your feelings about it? Is it going to happen here? When is it going to happen here?
And should it?
And
And should it happen here?
Huh?
And should it?
And should it?
It
And-
costs.
So,
Yeah.
There's a cost to it.
so my belief is that full day kindergarten should absolutely happen here. It's, I mentioned before, I grew up in Western New York. It was something that was a given. I have never fully understood the half day model here. But the other thing to remember is that kindergarten itself has fundamentally changed from what it was 20 years ago. And in terms of what, people joke that kindergarten is the new first grade and pre-K is the new kindergarten. And our students that, and I'm lucky enough that my son, who's in second grade now, went through a full day K program. And I saw the amount that he grew during that year. And that, we're always tempered by our own kids' experiences. And that certainly has an impact on my thinking. And, the fact is, in a 2.5 hour half day program, and it's, we're in the winter months right now, and especially when you think about kids coming in and how long it takes them to get everything off once they come in off the buses,
Sure.
and then how long it takes everything to pack up, and then the snack time. I mean, it's a very tight window of time to try to get everything done academically, while at the same time trying to help kids develop the kinds of social skills they need to, some who have basically been at home and not had as much of that formal interaction with other peers at the same age before. So that's why I fundamentally believe in full day K. The limiting factors we have right now are two things. In order to implement it, you need money and you need space. The money thing is something that if we plan for it effectively, we can do it. The Chapter 70, which is the Education Foundation funding formula, it's based upon number of students you have in the district. And all of our kindergarten students right now only count as half a kid because it's only a half-day program. Even our students in the extended day tuition-based program, because parents are paying, they only count as half a kid for funding. So if you do it, the funding will come a year later. So you need a one-time influx of money to jumpstart the program. And what we estimated that right now is about $500,000 across the board to bring in teachers, bring in supplies, because obviously your staffing is going to go up when everybody's there full day, because the teachers we're paying for the extended day program comes out of the tuition we're charging to parents. So, but again, that's something we can plan for because it's a one-time expenditure. And whether that's tapping into reserves or whether that's, whatever, a one-time thing we can handle. The bigger issue right now that we have is space. Through all of our facilities work, we know that we're overcrowded at the elementary level. Currently, according to MSBA guidelines, the Mass School Building Authority, 4 of our 6 elementary schools are overcrowded. The only 2 that aren't are the 2 newest ones, the Ditson and the Parker. And so we've got the Dutile that currently is 54% over capacity this year, according to MSBA. And the Hajar that's way over capacity. The Kennedy is way over capacity. Vining's a little bit. And if we wanted to go there, we simply don't have the rooms in our buildings to be able to do it. Now, through the facility study work, and we're talking about plans that may wind up with something major happening in 2017, 2018. And that would be the outside range for when I'd like to get full day K. And if we have ways to get it in sooner, faster, because we know it's good for kids, if we can do something creative with some of our spaces, that's something we're looking at. I mean, it's certainly not a case where we're going to be able to be there next year, because you've got to plan for it. And I will say at the elementary level, the reason it doesn't seem as overcrowded as it actually is because of all the modular classrooms we have. We've got 2 modulars at the Dutile, 2 at the Vining, 1 at the Kennedy, 1 at the Hajar.
And they're all over their extended life.
And they all should have been,
Well over
they all
there.
should have been torn down 10 or 15 years ago.
Yes.
And we spent over $100,000 repairing roofs on modular buildings a year ago after the snowstorm of 2 winters ago. So, that's why we've got to be smarter about the way that we plan long term, and that we're not just fixing problems as they arise, but we've got a systematic approach for these issues like facility space, so that we're not trying to do quick fixes that have negative long-term consequences.
What about renting space? What about renting
Can I
space?
just finish? Renting
We have a lot of
Just-
space.
Can I just ask one question? The guy that comes up to you and says, full-day kindergarten is nothing more than public daycare.
I would challenge them to come in and spend a day in our kindergarten classroom and see the amount of rigor that's in a kindergarten program right now. It is certainly not, public
But you can
daycare.
understand the perception.
I can understand the perception because again, it's what kindergarten is fundamentally different than what it used to be.
Really?
And go to the Department of Ed's website, look at the state standards for kindergarten, and look at the kinds of things that we're expecting students to do in math and in reading and in science and in social studies coming out of kindergarten. It would blow some people's minds compared to what it was, again, 20, 30 years ago.
Or longer.
Or
My daughter was in kindergarten. We put her in a full-day kindergarten. We didn't send her to kindergarten, yeah.
Well, you do have, in some schools, right? Don't you have the option of full day, or if I remember?
Well, the difference is we have an extended day K
Yeah,
program
extended
right now.
day, yeah.
So we parents that take advantage of that, it's a $3,000 tuition for extended day K, and because we only offer half day K, we're not allowed to do more curriculum during that extended part of the day. So it's an opportunity to.
Isn't that ludicrous?
I know.
Yeah, I mean, so we do some things like, we bring music in and we bring art in, and and don't get me wrong, I mean, there's absolutely a curriculum for
Yeah.
music and
Yeah,
art, and
yeah,
some of that is,
exactly.
most of, that is done through the half-day program as well, too, with the classroom teacher. But we have a music specialist come in, we have an art specialist come in, we do some computer work and some library work with kids in kindergarten in the extended day program. And it provides more of an opportunity for some of the social skill interaction and some reinforcement of some of the work that was done during the half-day program as well, too. And we are currently running about nine sections across the 6 schools, 3 at the Ditson, 2 at the Parker, and I think 1 at each of the other schools. I may be off by 1 there. So about half of our kindergarten students are in an extended day program right now.
How many children is that in number?
Yeah. How many kids are there in kindergarten?
There's about 360-ish, or 360, 380 in kindergarten. About half of them are in EDK right now, extended day.
Yeah. Do you see your numbers? I mean, obviously, it's part of what I've done over the years, but
Yeah.
you see numbers starting to level off, or how do you see your growth? back then?
Overall student
Yeah.
enrollment, we've done, it's a shame because we hadn't done enrollment projections for a number of years. We did them last year. We're in the middle of doing them right now. We have a group called NESDEC that we're working
Yep.
with that does that. We're going to continue to do them annually because, again, if you want to have long-range planning, you need to have data to
Yeah.
do long-range planning with. The projections we have right now say that at the elementary level, we're starting to about level off. But the issue is, from a district perspective, we're going to still be seeing some declining enrollment over the next few years as the number of kids we have per grade level at the elementary level is less than what we have. So as bigger classes come out of the high school, smaller classes are coming into the pipeline in kindergarten. So we are going to see some declining enrollment for the next few years. What will happen in the future is going to depend on a lot of factors beyond our control. What happens with housing, what happens with business in the air, all those kinds of things. But that's why we need to stay on top of our projections and have a good relationship with the town offices too, to know what's going on from that perspective with things like zoning and building and all the
Expansion
rest of
and
it.
everything.
All those kinds of
Apartment
things.
buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering, because I know, again, and I don't know, looking at it, how much time you want to spend on his proposals. I mean, it's, I don't know how much, because you talked, the last seminar you had, or session you had, that in December you were looking to make a proposal out of, you have 6 different, I believe?
So we currently have 6 different plans on the
Plans,
table,
yeah.
6 different options on the table, I should say, regarding to our facility study. And I will say that at one point there were about 12, and we narrowed it down to 6 to present publicly because people, I mean, it's the presentation I've done. It's a 72-slide presentation. I mean, if we added 6 more options, people's breaking point was enough. We took some of the bad ones off the table. The idea is not that the idea was never that we were going to have one option to go with right now. Our plan is that we've come to the realization that the leverage point around all of our facilities work is about the high school.
Yeah.
And with 3 major questions that sort of form the decision tree. What should we do with the high school? If we decide to do something with it, which we think the answer is yes based upon what we know at this point, I can talk about that in a second. What should we do with the high school? What should the grade span of the high school be? Where should it be? And those 3 questions form the decision, form the branches of that decision tree. So knowing that the high school is the linchpin for all of this, our plan is that we'll be going forward to the Mass School Building Authority, the MSBA, for a statement of interest for what's called a feasibility study. They open up that window in January. So a feasibility study, just like we did with the Parker a few years ago, will allow us to look at all the various options, see what's feasible, look at site, look at cost, look at all these sorts of things, and eventually, over the course of about a year that feasibility study will take, narrow it down to one option.
Okay, so you're about a year off.
So we're about a year off from narrowing it down, and we're in the community presentation information gathering phase right now. But the idea would that there'd be an option presented sometime in 2014, best case scenario, where either in the spring or the fall, depending on how long that feasibility study took, then we'd be looking to potentially go forward with a town meeting vote and then a townwide vote for a high school project. The question of what to do with the high school, it's a monetary question. We know we need to do something. It's a building that, it was originally 2 buildings, and we still call the new edition.
That's right.
The one that opened in the early 70s. It's still the new edition for everybody. And let me say this out front, because this is incredibly important. It's not about buildings. It's about the education that goes on within those buildings and how our buildings currently limit that education from taking place. And that's a combination of not having the ability to use the kind of technology we need to use. When you go into most classrooms in the high school and there's 1 or 2 outlets. Yeah. And so if we're trying to do things like, have interactive whiteboards and potentially more one-on-one computing for kids and things like that, we don't have the simple electrical capacity to do it. And at the same time, at our elementary levels, if we're trying to do things with iPads like we're doing in the Parker, and it's tough to get wireless signals in because the schools were built as part school and part bomb shelter with thick concrete walls that wireless signals can't get through. And also about having kinds of spaces where, when we talked before about kids critiquing and working collaboratively, if your rooms are only big enough to fit kids in traditional rows, and you can't have groups where kids can discuss and work, those are the limiting factors that we have. And so when we look at the high school itself, and we just went through the study from Doran Whittier, that's the architectural firm that did the study, they said that the bill to bring that high school up to where it needs to be through just repair is $105 million, which is a number to choke on. And that dollar figure, almost all of it would be non-reimbursable, which means it's all in the local taxpayer's dime. And $30 million of that to replace the HVAC system in the high school. $5.7 million to replace all the electrical switchgear, and $4.1 million to sprinkler it, and all. It's a combination of health and safety and educational functionality and all the rest of it. And when we look at a potential building project, the renovation cost is higher than a new construction cost, just because of it's a building that's much bigger than we in terms of total square footage. Our high school is nearly a 450,000 gross square foot building. And there's a lot of wasted space in there that's essentially long corridors. Yeah. Building designs are not, it doesn't make a lot of sense to heat long corridors anymore. And not to mention the fact that it's so spread out that, you've got issues with too many external doors and things like that as well too. And so the cost of building new, from what we know right now, is cheaper than the cost of renovation, but that's what a feasibility study is supposed to do, which is why we're looking at a new high school project. From a community perspective, when we look at our neighbors, Tewksbury just opened a new high school. Wilmington's in the process of building a new high school. When I talk about a competitive marketplace, it's not just a competitive marketplace education with us compared to the other places that Billerica can send its kids. When we talk about where families are looking to move and where our teachers are looking to teach, we need to make sure that we're a place. I said this at my public interview. I want Billerica to be a destination for education in the Merrimack Valley. And in order to do that, we need to have the kinds of programs within our buildings, but we also need to have the kind of facilities that allow for that to happen. And so that's some of the work that we need to do on this front.
It's funny, just quickly, what he said about a destination place.
Yeah.
When your Parker school was getting ready to open up, I had a phone call from a real estate agent. And I think he might have called you.
Yeah, I think so.
And there was an issue where the cutoff was who was going to go to Parker or not. And he had, I guess, in his own thought, was that his development was probably 6 or 8 homes. Those kids were going to be able to go to the Parker. He thought that was happening. And he was literally selling the houses. I think he had a sign.
Yeah, the sign is still up right now.
Yeah, he had a sign saying that he was selling the school as part of his home, which was, what you're saying is exactly what people are looking at and trying to, potentially come in to see the system like that when it's changed and everything.
Well, I had a complaint from a resident who's has elementary school children, and her complaint was, why are my taxes paying for the Parker School where every child has the availability of a smart board or whiteboard or whatever, and my child at the Kennedy does not? And you can go into all the, technology, go into all that, but how do you answer something like that?
Well, so the short-term answer was that when the Parker opened, and because the state kicked in half the money for it, the state gets to set a lot of the rules. And so the rules are that there was a $600,000 budget for technology for the Parker School that could only be spent for the Parker School. And so, with those parameters, our job was how do we spend that money most effectively for the kids at the Parker? Which is why we have the smart boards and they're Promethean boards, but smart boards, it's like Kleenex, it's the generic name. We have the interactive whiteboards in every classroom, and we have iPads, and we have iPod touches, and we have individual clicker systems. And the argument is, we shouldn't lower what's the Parker and say we ought to raise everybody else up. So when we talk about the Kennedy, that's part of what this plan is designed to do, is how do we bring up the level of technology across all the other schools? And I'm happy to say that just this week we placed an order for 31 interactive whiteboards across the other elementary schools. So we're bringing them into the other schools right now. They're going first to teachers that are piloting. It goes back to our new math program again. To do our new math program, we need to have the kinds of technological resources, even at the early elementary level, to allow teachers to do it effectively. And so it's our job through our operating budget or through some of the money that we were able the town was gratefully approved for us out of free cash at this fall's town meeting, is going to bring those technology resources into the other buildings. And so again, it comes down to long-range planning, that you had a one-time influx of the Parker to kickstart it in that building. And so now our focus and our efforts have to be at is how do we bring every other school up to that level in a systematic way that's best for kids.
It's great to hear that you are addressing that and addressing it in a very quick fashion.
Yeah.
So, basically these students will be losing half a year or maybe a school year of this availability.
Yeah, I would love to be able to blanket every classroom in the district.
Yeah,
and that's what we're buying Powerball tickets for, but unfortunately they didn't come through. But we are steadfastly committed to bring that level up across the district for everybody. And this is the first step.
And it sounds like it's sooner rather than later.
Absolutely.
But it's not easy to do.
I understand that, but I can understand this young woman's complaint. It's a very valid complaint. Is there an answer? No, but it's a valid complaint.
You're getting ready for a reval, right? Or
accreditation.
Accreditation, yeah. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so every 10 years, and it's actually a little bit more than 10 years this time because the outside group wanted to delay it for us. But there's a group called the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, NEASC for short. And so they're the accrediting organization in this part of the country. And actually I was involved in the steering committee for the last high school accreditation back from, and I worked on that from 2000 to 2002. So there's a visiting team coming from NEASC to our high school next fall in 2013. And NEASC is sort of, for lack of a better term, the good housekeeping seal of approval on schools. So when our students leave here, having a NEASC accreditation says to colleges and universities that the kind of education students receive in Billerica is worthy of next steps. And they look at our schools in a number of different areas: in instruction, in curriculum, in assessment, in school resources for kids, in community resources, and in leadership and organization. The community resources are about funding, but they're also about facilities. And I actually served on a visiting team out to the Mahar School in Orange 10, 11 years ago. And I was the chair of the subgroup that looked at facilities out there. So when that team comes in fall of 2013, my expectation is that we will know at that point whether or not we've entered into a feasibility phase for the high school. And my hope is certainly that we have. And if we have, then that's a message that's being sent to this outside group that's coming in, that we are addressing the needs that we have with our facility at the high school. If that group has not, or if we have not secured a feasibility study at that point, then that group will probably come in and we will get hit hard on accreditation. And there are other schools in the area that have been put on probation for their facilities and not doing the kind of work that they need to do to upgrade them. And so that's a line that we need to be careful about, because again, that accreditation seal of approval means a lot for our kids when they go to applied colleges. And so they will come in fall of 2013, and then we actually have to do 2- and 5-year reports about what work has continued to be done on these issues going forward. And the hope is that by a 2-year report, which would be sometime in 2015, we will actually be in process of something with the high school. But again, that depends on certainly the members in this community.
Yeah.
So.
Can I just go back to one thing about the MSBA, Tim, and that is how much input, when you're going forward with these feasibility studies and what you'd like to see, how much input do you have, and how much control does the MSBA have on what you'd like to see? And the reason I say that is originally when we were building the Parker School, we were talking about a 700-student school. And at that time, there was talk about maybe closing the Vining also. There was all kinds of talk out there. But the state basically came in and told us 500 was the maximum.
Yeah. Well, so the situation then is a little bit different than the situation now. The issue, and I will freely admit, I was not involved in that project at the time, so I'm relying on what I know from others. But when the MSBA approved the Parker project, it was because they were responding, we here locally were responding to a crisis situation. That building was deemed one of the most unsafe schools in the state. And, I've certainly heard loud and clear from this community that we can't afford to be in that kind of a situation again. We need to make sure that we're doing the upkeep and the maintenance in our buildings so we don't wind up in a crisis mode again, ever. But the second piece is that we didn't have any kind of a master plan at that point in time. So when we proposed trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone potentially and make a larger Parker that may consolidate with the Vining, the state said to us that you can't show that you've actually done any kind of real work to plan this out and why this is the best long-term solution. So they said, no, the Parker itself was 360 students, or I guess when it closed last year, the old Parker was about 360 students. We'll give you a little bit more space to alleviate some of your other overcrowding issues. But we're not going to build a school to solve all your problems. Our job is to solve your problem with the Parker. The difference now is that because we have a master plan that's been developed, and we have a better sense of how all these pieces fit together. And I will say that when we started the work with Doran Whittier, we had 3 main goals in mind originally. 1 was to look at developing a long-range capital improvement plan. 2 was to figure out what we should do with the high school. 3 was to look at whether or not we should potentially be closing an elementary school. And we realized that 2 and 3 couldn't be treated in isolation. We had to really have that long-range look that said, how do these pieces all interplay with each other? So because we have that now, when we go to the MSBA, we're in a better position to say, okay, this is what we're proposing, this is why we're proposing it, and they'll should be able to work with us much better on that front. I mean, throughout this process, you have a building committee, and that building committee interacts with the MSBA, and some of this is legwork on our part to have those conversations with the MSBA and say, here's what we're thinking about, here's why we're thinking about it, and they will be, their primary mission is to fund building projects in the most efficient, including economically efficient way possible.
Sure.
Yeah.
So if we can go to them and say, we're looking to do something different because of this and this and this.
And this is how it benefits us.
And this is how it
long range.
benefits us long range
Right.
and benefits the taxpayers long range because we have all these needs, but this is a way to address multiple needs in a systematic way that makes more sense. They're going to be much more receptive to that than us just coming in, not having done our homework and saying, we think this is a good idea.
I think it was like Community of Peabody, or one of the communities up there that, exactly what you're talking about. I think the sense of it is that they went out and built a brand new school, and within 2 years later, they closed it. Because they did exactly what they're making them do, apparently, making like enrollments where you go and project. There was something that I remember seeing on TV saying that was part of the issues, that they're building these.
It just seemed short.
It takes now, they're looking into
It
detail.
just seemed very short-sighted of the MSBA at the time. It was, it was painfully obvious we had 6 elementary schools that were overcrowded, 1 that was falling down.
Yes, but why
And we
would
could have
you
answered-
expect them, why would you expect them to approve a project bigger than,
You need it.
than they needed,
Yeah.
when the town hadn't demonstrated
Yes,
that
exactly
this
what
was
you're
going to
saying.
solve many more of their long-term goals.
And I agree with that, except for I disagree with the fact that this was an obvious overcrowding situation. Tim just told us, 5 of your
Right, but
elementary
so you're
schools are
asking,
overcrowded.
you're asking state,
I'm
you're
sorry,
asking,
4.
you're asking taxpayers statewide to fix a problem that Billerica didn't make a long-term plan for.
Was that same MSBA statewide that built the $200 million Taj Mahal in Newton?
Yes.
I mean,
Right,
come on.
that's not-
Actually, I will say that it's actually not the same MSBA.
Oh,
It was,
it
it was, well, it was.
So, yeah, to answer your question, no.
So,
Smart ass.
There you go.
I actually will say that was one of the triggers, is that there was the old school building authority, and then after the issues in Newton, they put a moratorium on school building. And they revamped their rules and reopened up as the MSBA. Now, MSBA sounds an awful lot like SBA.
Does to me.
But that being said, because of that, they revamped the rules and made it a much more rigorous process so that what happened in Newton doesn't happen again. And so that's why there was a new set of rules that we were playing under when we did the Parker compared to what it would have been 5 years prior. So just a little bit of the.
Well, that's good to know.
Sorry, Peter.
Even if you didn't want to pick your argument.
Just pins you back.
You know, I always hated to go into the superintendent's
Now you know why.
We're winding down here, we have a few minutes, but I think we talked before on air, is that just to talk a little bit about, unfortunately, the incident yesterday, and, what you want to talk about, Ken, for a couple minutes of how things have changed in the system, to hopefully ward off some of these issues.
Can I just go into, and Tony and I were
Okay.
talking about it earlier, and I'd like you to kind of address how you're preparing your teachers for Monday morning,
Oh,
the
that's
questions
interesting,
they will get from the students.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
Or parents.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Or parents.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, it's a situation that we're still working. I mean, we're taping this at Saturday morning. We're still working through some of our response to this, and it's, for me, it hits on two fronts. It hits me as a superintendent of a district that's got 5,700 kids in it, and it hits me as a parent of a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. I spent a lot of yesterday trying to work through those issues on both fronts. And so when we talk about Monday morning, we need to make sure that we talk with all of our staff members, and so the kinds of conversations we have with kids are had at an age-appropriate level. One of the things that we're blessed to have recently done is that we had 50 to 60 of our staff members just this last week go through crisis management training. Principals and teachers and social workers and psychologists and some of the clinicians in our schools that really will help provide that sort of support. And we have crisis response teams in each school, and our key as we go in on Monday is first to have the conversations with teachers so that we know that we're sending kids a consistent message and that it's a safe place for our kids to be. But at the same time, I don't think it's appropriate, particularly the elementary level, to be having full class discussions because, I know as a parent, I've shielded my kids from knowing what happened yesterday at this point. And I need to have those conversations with them, especially my second grader. I'll be talking to him in very general sort of tones first, just so that he's not caught off guard by what some other kid may say on Monday morning. But at the same time, our teachers need to know that if our kids are hurting or struggling or having difficulty coping, that we have the resources in each of our schools, again with our social workers and our other trained people, to talk with kids and assure them that our schools are safe and nurturing and supportive environments. And really that's our big key on Monday, is to make sure that teachers can kind of handle the first level, but if it gets deeper than that, then our kids should be working with our trained professionals in the building. So
Logistically, how do you get your teachers to school? I guess, do you have to bring them in early so you can have staff meetings in the morning?
Yeah, I mean, we've done that. I mean, we're still working through some of the logistics of that right now. I mean, it's been 24 hours at this point.
Sure.
Email Tony.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, you gotta
email
get
is
him
one
there,
thing, but
though.
you
But you got to get them there so they can understand his message,
Yeah.
that it needs to be age appropriate. You're not putting that in an email.
No, I mean, and we've, I've certainly been through, as a teacher, through, crises in the past. And, those are the situations where, yeah, I mean, you can send on a phone call and email to teachers and ask them to come in a little bit early and have the conversations, have a staff meeting before school starts, so that we're all on the same page.
Yeah, you
with
want your
each
message
other.
to be consistent.
Yeah, absolutely.
All the teachers.
Yeah.
And what you're just saying is interesting, because just before we came on the air, when I was getting ready and watching TV, just what you just said.
It was late.
I was late. BU professor, clinical doctor, was talking just exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
How to handle elementary, much different than you handle middle school and high school. And I never really thought of it that much, but they're saying that some kids you want to, just exactly what you're talking about your own. Elementary, they were literally talking parents should be shielding, in some sense shielding some of the elementary. They don't need to be overloaded with some of this information where, as they get older, so what you're saying exactly is what they're saying now, you hear out there, unfortunately, and on the news as it's going on.
Yeah, and
Well, you have to have, as he talks, psychologists and the school nurses are going to have to be very aware of children that may require more in-depth
Yeah.
services. And there are going to be children out there who are going to, whether they're in Billerica or not, and they're going to need private services. They're going to. This is just awful.
Yeah, it is. Terrible thing. Unfortunately, you know what it is too, what we can't get to them is the parents. And hopefully the parents are doing what you're saying, sitting down, trying to figure out how they're going to cope with get the kids ready themselves, not
Yeah,
just
well,
the
I have
teachers.
noticed-
and that's part of our responsibility too, is to send out communication to parents about
Yes.
how to have those conversations. I mean, we
And what your message is, so that they get a consistent message.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that, it's, I think, last night, I sent out some things through social media about resources from the National Association of School Psychologists, some links that were sent out by the Secretary of Education's office from Massachusetts, different resources, web resources for parents to at least, have some of those conversations. I think, it's more important to have a communication from each school that talks about this, because each school has their own, and can identify the people by name as resources in each school for kids to be able to talk to. So there's one sort of generic level we can send out to parents, but I think there needs to be a personal level from each of our schools about each of their communities and what resources are there for kids.
Well, we got a little over 2 minutes.
Yeah, I just want to go back to your issue on accreditation for a second.
Yeah.
What percentage of the schools, either nationwide or statewide, don't pass the test, I guess? for-
Don't pass
Accre-
or don't
don't-
currently have it.
Either currently don't have it, or, yeah, I guess let's just say don't have it.
To be honest, I don't know of one.
Would it be-
at least in terms of?
That troubles me, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
If it's that easy, I'm not saying it's that easy, don't get me wrong.
it's not easy.
But if everybody passes,
Oh, we had
then,
years,
Well,
we had Chelsea and Lawrence.
You
that
had-
were-
yeah.
Probation,
So there's a
that's
difference. I mean, there's a difference between not having it and having it and being on probation.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, there's and I don't have the stats
I
on me,
understand.
so I don't know, how many schools are currently on probation across the state. And generally, if your school gets put on probation, then you've got to do some drastic things to get yourself off of probation. And yeah, I mean, you had mentioned Lawrence as one of the schools that I know had that issue for a
Right.
while.
In Chelsea
Was
20
another
years
one.
ago.
Yeah. So that's the issue. I mean, is that,
I mean,
it's the same kind of thing. We don't want to wind up in a
don't wanna-
crisis.
you don't wanna find out.
Well, exactly, yeah.
but I worry about, you said you had visited out in Orange,
Out in
correct?
Orange, yeah.
So is there someone from Orange that could be here, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
my thinking is, if it's peers that are looking at
We'd
each
like
other,
them. We'd like to move.
That's not a big deal. I just,
No, that's not the point.
It's
We don't
important,
have
I
enough
understand it's
time.
important.
The next time we bring him on, hopefully he'll come back, that we can, get a little bit more deeper into this and some other issues. Tim, thank you very much.
And thank you, I
You're
appreciate
taking
it.
some time off on a Saturday from your family to come out. I sure think it's
You missed
informative.
basketball practice.
Yep.
I did.
I hope people take an opportunity to review some of your presentations. I think they're online, as well as go to some of them about the future of the school system themselves. I'd like to say to everybody, on behalf of the staff and everything, wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. We have some other shows obviously planned right after the holidays and people back from vacation. Thanks, enjoy it. Hopefully it's a safe and happy holidays for the people. And a little less snow, maybe out in Buffalo would be different, but they're looking for what I heard out there. There isn't much to that. But again, to everybody, enjoy. Get your shopping done, Peter. We don't have much
Never
time.
again.
I know.
Take a night.
Good night, everyone.